she believed him. Humanity, in its attempt to destroy itself, had made the world unlivable. She had been certain she would die, even though she had survived the bombing without a scratch. She had considered her survival a misfortune, a promise of a more lingering death. And now? "Is there anything left on Earth?" she whispered. "Anything alive, I mean." "Oh yes. Time and our efforts have been restoring it." That stopped her. She managed to look at him for a moment without being distracted by the slowly writhing tentacles. Restoring it? Why? "For use. You'll go back there eventually." This is an excerpt from Dawn by Octavia Butler, and this is the first book in the Lilith's Brood or Xenogenesis series. The 4 books include Dawn, Adulthood Rites, Imago, and Lilith's Brood, and this is the first book I've completed in 2026. This year on Shocks Talks, we're starting with a new season, The Truth is Stranger Than Fiction, and I'm going to be toggling back and forth between my typical research into anomalous and UFO studies, alien encounters and abductions, and all of the psi phenomena that accompanies this topic, and the novels and speculative fiction and sci-fi stories that have similar themes and cover these same topics and ideas in a more fantastical way, because I believe that this gives us a better chance at analyzing the anomalous. What I mean is that sometimes when we try to study something that is so outside of the realm of what we've been taught is real, we end up spending most of the time just battling our own ego in our mind, because every time a new piece of information comes in, the ego rises up and rebels against it and says, "This can't possibly be real. I don't even want to listen to this. I might be considered stupid or weird if I start paying attention to this nonsense. Heaven forbid other people think poorly of me," and it just gets really out of control really quickly. So sometimes a better way to consider these interesting possibilities is just simply by reading a cool story and letting your imagination run wild. The deeper I go into my own psi studies, the more I realize imagination has a key role to play in maturing our individual consciousness or our individual units of consciousness to reach the next level of human existence. This takes a lot of imagination, actually. It's going to play a role in accessing the imaginal realms or the liminal, these consciousness realms that exist beyond physical matter reality. These are places or data streams that can be accessed through meditation, visualization, sleep, and dreaming, and other altered states, including OBEs. And reading and practicing using the imagination is like doing an exercise, like lifting weights or something. It kind of switches our mental gears and allows us to process in a different way. And that skill is going to be essential in mastering those other psi abilities. So, for example, when you read, you're already shifting data streams. You're entering into a created virtual realm that was constructed through words. And your whole consciousness is entering into that space and interpreting that data and also extrapolating. So reading and using the imagination are going to be key in us all progressing when it comes to our psychic and psi abilities. And then I also feel that imagination will play a key role in us working together to consciously create the future we want instead of just defaulting to the plan that has been laid out by these hidden systems of control. As we're going to see today in our analysis of this story, humankind is very limited in terms of the factors that are influencing the choices we make. And the very essence of who we are as individuated units of consciousness in a consciousness reality is the choice-making capabilities that we have. It's our free will. So when our choices are being influenced by things like our neural programming, our genetic programming, our chemistry, and other external factors, once we can see that and get a hold of it, we have therefore matured to the next level of consciousness, because we are now seeing from a greater vantage point, and we are taking more choices under our own free will's control. So therefore taking greater responsibility, but also expanding the potential of our journey as humans. So this is a really cool thing that I'm into that has been discussed extensively by Tom Campbell in his work around his My Big Toe trilogy. And I think it's really cool that the story that we're going to analyze today is going to reinforce this notion that a lot of what goes on in humanity is rooted in our genetic predisposition. So, in this story, Lilith Ayapo wakes up on an alien ship and learns that she is a part of a small group of humans who were rescued by an alien race called the Onkali when the planet Earth was destroyed in a nuclear war. According to these aliens, they plan to help humans reseed the planet in exchange for a trade. They want to merge with the human species through relationships that involve chemical, neural manipulation, and eventually interbreeding. But they're also trading genes. In the back of this book, there are some really interesting discussion questions laid out for anyone who's reading it, and I actually wanted to go through a couple of them because they were perfect. So starting with this, the Onkali identify intelligence and hierarchy as the human race's fatal combination of characteristics. Do you agree? What do you think humans' most advantageous and dangerous qualities? So in this story, first, Lilith is alone, and she's being trained by these aliens. She's learning about who they are. They have 3 genders, a male, a female, and a third kind of a non-binary type gender. And that particular gender has a very sacred and special role in their communities, but it's also kind of this uniting force that brings together these other partners in a kind of 3-person relationship, essentially. And the way that it ends up playing out in the story is one of this specific type of Onkali, the Uloi, and 2 humans, usually male and female. And this creaturely being, this Uloi character, can actually facilitate a kind of interbreeding between the humans and the Onkali genetics. So as we reach the end of the story, we realize that that's where we're going in the next book. So in this discussion question, we're looking at humans' most advantageous and dangerous qualities. And this relates to the research I do, especially when it comes to the work of Richard Dolan. He's a historian who studies the patterns of UFO sightings and also experiencer and abductee accounts. But he's mostly focused on UFOs and USOs, the underwater ships or craft. And one of the things that he has talked about a lot as a historian who has also studied the patterns of humanity, humankind, regardless of whether or not aliens have been involved, one thing we know for sure is that part of how we have reached the level that we're at is through violence, and that violence is actually innate to our survival as a species, and it is one of the key factors in how humankind has come to be in the position it is today on the earth. And it's also a key factor in how we've shaped our cultures and societies, and the beings among us who didn't make it as far as we, this version of humans, didn't have that same trait in the way that we do. So in this story, the alien species is describing to the main character Lilith how we have this combination of intelligence and hierarchy. You are intelligent, he said. That's the newer of the 2 characteristics, and the one you might have put to work to save yourselves. You are potentially one of the most intelligent species we've found, though your focus is different from ours. Still, you had a good start in the life sciences and even in genetics. You're hierarchical. That's the older and more entrenched characteristic. We saw it in your closest animal relatives and in your most distant ones. It's a terrestrial characteristic. When human intelligence did not even acknowledge it as a problem, but took pride in it, or did not notice it at all, that was like ignoring cancer. I think your people did not realize what a dangerous thing they were doing. So it's interesting, they talk about cancer in the story because the character has cancer in her family, and one of the things that the aliens are able to do who rescue her is they're able to fix that genetic predisposition. They're able to cure the cancer from her. And they're also able to increase her strength, and they're also able to increase her ability to heal rapidly. So these are very similar to the kinds of things that people report when they have had contact with aliens. They talk about getting abilities. Sometimes they have healing abilities to heal themselves or others. Sometimes they have diseases removed, or they are healed from a mental or emotional condition. And the third genetic modification that the Oankali make to Lilith that also applies to many experiencers is they alter her in a way that bonds her to them. Now, this is very fascinating because when you look at an experiencer like Whitley Strieber, for example, he talks a lot about the horrors that occurred to him early in his relationship with these intelligences and beings, and how traumatic it was for him. And then over time, how he grew to understand them in a different way. And at this point in his life, he's openly referring to this feminine alien being as his other wife. And his human wife has passed on, and he had a very special and important relationship with both of them. And this is very interesting because in this day and age, we do have many younger people openly exploring polyamory, relationships with more than one person, even where people live together. We have a lot more people openly expressing their non-binary identities in the culture. And all of these themes coincide with the themes of this book. One thing to note about Octavia Butler is that many people see her as not only a prolific writer, but a prophetic one. She wrote the Parable of the Sower series, which many people compare to what's happening right now in reality. And I believe that she is the kind of writer who is most likely drawing ideas from the collective psyche, or what some consider the collective unconscious or subconscious. I think all these terms, are pointing towards something which is a shared understanding. It's the larger consciousness system that we as individuated consciousness units are all a part of. On the Telepathy Tapes podcast, they cover this idea that creatives are drawing their ideas out of the ether or out of this collective pot of knowledge. And if you're so lucky to come into contact with a brilliant idea, but you don't take the action to bring it to life, you may very well find that someone else has found that same idea and had what it took to nurture it and bring that idea into reality. And this is not because they were spying on you or they knew what was going on in your mind. It's because both of you independently came into contact with the same idea, and it's only a matter of time before somebody brings that into existence. So authors, storytellers, creators of all kinds are doing this all the time. I work in a creative industry, and trust me, we see it all the time. We come up with an idea, we're working on it for years and years, and in the meantime, someone else is working on the same idea in parallel, in a different place in the world even. And it feels uncanny, but it's just part of the nature of reality. When we read a novel by someone like Octavia Butler, it's fun to imagine the possibility that she is pulling from experiences or truths that may exist in the collective. She could also just be pulling from the collective imagination. Either way, it's exciting. But what makes me think it's more than that is the parallels between this and experiencer stories. There are just so many. Another interesting question from the study questions at the back of this book is, what are some of the political and social hierarchies in our world? Why do they exist? And how could they weaken us? I think it's most important for us to examine that final part. How could they weaken us? And I think we're seeing that now in our current reality, where a lot of our systems of power and control are no longer serving human rights interests. They are no longer serving the highest good of all, but rather they are serving the interests of the few. And this is causing a lot of emotional strife and a lot of disaster in our current reality. And so it does seem that it is a good time for us to reconsider the benefit and the cost of our hierarchical systems. And maybe in some ways, in some areas of reality, they serve a purpose. They create a structure that allows us to function optimally. But maybe there are other areas in which they have grown a kind of a energetic cancer. And this is what the Oankali were talking about in this book. They talk about intelligence in combination with the hierarchical nature of humans. Jediah, one of the alien characters, says to Lilith, the human character, that intelligence does enable you to deny facts you dislike. What do you think he means by this? This is one of the discussion questions. Yes, he said, intelligence does enable you to deny facts you dislike, but your denial doesn't matter. A cancer growing in someone's body will go on growing in spite of denial, and a complex combination of genes that work together to make you intelligent as well as hierarchical will still handicap you whether you acknowledge it or not. So, in this metaphor of a cancer, the solution here is to shine a light on it, or to actually look at it, because if it's growing out of control, unnoticed or unseen, whether you deny it or accept it, it's doing what it's doing. And it can wreak havoc on the body. And it can become the end, it can wreak havoc in a way where it leads to total destruction. And in this story, that's exactly what happens on the planet Earth. This cancer of the mind, or cancer of the energies of the people of Earth, goes undetected, and it reaches a boiling point when nuclear war destroys everything. And so in this metaphor, the solution would be to shine a light on our systems, our hierarchical systems, and consider whether or not they are still serving us, or if they need to be modified in some ways. And if we ignore what's going on, we may see the end of our civilization and our planet. This idea that we need to really stop and take a look at things and make some serious changes is not just an idea being presented in this novel by Octavia Butler, but it is a message that has been repeated so many times by contactees and abductees who have spoken with alien beings. They're very often reinforcing the need for us to take care of each other and our planet. And they are very often interfering with our nuclear capabilities to show us this is an area that we need to really slow down and change our ways. So some of the questions that I came up with as a result of reading this story: how many times have hormones, chemicals, or genes impacted the direction of your life? Have you ever been head over heels in love with someone who you later find out you are not emotionally or intellectually compatible with, even though your chemistry was fire? Have you noticed the strong urge to take care of others during the fertile phases in your life? Have you ever felt a surge of testosterone or some other chemical that made you want to act in a more extreme way than your intellect might like? Now, these questions are based on the Onkali's relationship to humans in this story. So in the story, the Onkali beings are able to create really euphoric experiences in the humans that help bond them to them. They're able to feed them pleasures that are neurally created, but they combine the individual's basically database of pleasure with the partners, and they're heightened by the presence of the third Onkali being, the third gender being in this race. And that combination of memories and neural stimulus create this really overwhelming experience for the humans that kind of bonds them to their Onkali, because it's something that they care a lot about. We all care about feeling good. We humans are driven by desire. And so if a being can tap into one of the areas where we have the most desire, which is for pleasure and especially sexual pleasure, then they therefore have a lever. They have a little bit of leverage to use with us. It's kind of the way that we humans give our animals treats to reward them or to entice them or to train them to behave in certain ways. These beings are treating humans in a similar way, but through direct neural stimulation and chemical genetic manipulation. And this is a fascinating concept because, again, many experiencers report things like this and they don't know how to describe it. So different doctors and people who study the phenomena have tried to describe it in all kinds of different ways. And when I really zoom out from all of the nitty-gritty nuts and bolts, even physical matter reality possibilities, I think if we just consider at the very most zoomed out level this idea that consciousness can be manipulated, that alone is extremely powerful to imagine. And if consciousness can be manipulated like we know it can through psychedelics, for example, or heightened experiences in life, like when you fall in love at first sight, and you're flooded with all of these incredible chemicals and you feel absolutely euphoric, maybe even a little manic. Maybe you're even starting to hallucinate sparkles around the person you love or things like that. This is not uncommon. And these are all, the filters are changing on our reality. So we're all experiencing through these different filters, and the filters are being affected by so many different factors, some of them physical, but perhaps some of them non-physical. So in the story, the beings are really working on a genetic physical level, but in experience accounts, it's less clear what's going on. Is it mental manipulation? Is it a combination of some kind of drugging and some kind of mental manipulation, or telepathic or energetic manipulation? All of these things and more have been considered in the literature that looks at and analyzes experiences that humans have had with non-human intelligences. I've been contemplating questions like these for many years, and what I've decided for myself is that I'm okay with some of the limitations that were placed upon my soul when I incarnated in this human form, kind of because I have to be. At a certain point, we all have to let go of this idea that we have absolute control, or the idea that we are the very top of the food chain, and it's a great part of evolving our maturity level in consciousness to accept the fact that we are not at the top or at the bottom. We're just in the middle of this infinite loop of creation. And that means that wherever we find ourselves at any moment in time, in any reality frame that we may be in, it's good to assume I'm not the top and I'm not the bottom. There's something that I need to be paying attention to on either side of me that is important for me to relate to, that which has more power than me and that which has less. You know, it's important to have a perspective on these things. And part of the human error is that we have denied ourselves the ability to create a strong perspective when it comes to that, because we have denied the reality that there are beings that exist outside of our world and maybe even within it, who have capabilities that go far beyond our current capabilities. That's a mistake. And it's a total willful denial of reality. And that's one of the things that is being explored in this story as well. Every time a new human is awakened from these sleeping pods on the ship, they are faced with the same journey that Lilith took at the beginning of the story. And that is the journey of taking in new information and actually being able to accept, or some of them reject and deny. And those who accept this new reality can kind of evolve and move forward in it. Those who deny often don't make it. They either self-implode or they get into so much conflict that somebody ends up getting hurt or killed because they deny the evidence that is being presented to them. And this is so interesting to me because it perfectly describes the relationship that some humans have to this anomalous information that is constantly trying to bubble up and out into the larger reality and is constantly being pushed back down and suppressed by the powers that be. Eventually, they won't be able to contain it any longer, but every individual will have the choice to accept or deny new information as it comes in and to adapt accordingly. Those who are able to open to new information are going to have a much better chance of survival and thriving in the future. And those who are hell-bent on denying are going to face the same kinds of issues that the characters in Dawn faced, which are self-destruction or conflict that leads to more destruction. I go back to this idea of martial artists because they are an example of a kind of person who has to attain a level of mastery over self in order to move forward in their art. I recently adopted 2 cats, and they're still in the process of getting to know each other, so they're still in their separate rooms, but they're actually like on either side of the door right now, just sniffing each other under the little crack at the bottom of the door. And nothing has been more like contacting aliens than merging my life with these cats. They're so different and they're so interesting, and I never knew because I had a dog before this, and I haven't had a cat since I was a little kid, and it was a very wild country cat that was mostly outdoor doing his own thing. So he kind of just came and went as he pleased. But having these 2 cats now, I'm learning so much, and I feel like the alien in the story who abducted the humans, and it's like the humans, you know, they were in a horrible situation. The planet was destroyed. They needed to be taken up and out. But once they get on the ship, they're freaking out and they hate the aliens and they're fighting against them. And all they're thinking about is how they can escape and how they can get back to their own way of being. But the path forward is looking more and more like that's not going to be an option in this story that I'm reading. And when I think about animals, it's so similar. We've created these domesticated creatures that some can live without us and run wild, but their chances of survival are lower. And the ones that do live with us, while they love us and end up bonding with us, there is a point at which they are thinking about how they can escape and how they can get back out into the wild where they can express their instinctual nature. And so part of what we do as humans is we try to create an environment that gives them as much of what they crave as we can possibly offer. So for cats, for example, you know, making sure that they have all these different levels to climb on and play on, making sure that there are places where they can lounge in the sun and places where they can hide in little caves, and getting into their cyclical nature and their structure, their rhythms, you know, waking up before the sun, and that's when they're energetic and they want to play, and we have to really run up and down the hall and play with all the different toys and chase things and bite things and tackle things. And then, you know, after they've done that, they want to have their little eating time because they made their kill and now they want to eat it, you know? And it goes on, and I'm learning all of this stuff right now, but it's so interesting because in this story, the aliens are trying to provide the humans with different things that they want and need. They're trying to take care of them. They're trying to simulate these certain comforts and things like that. And they're also trying to train them to go back to the planet and reseed the planet. They are bringing them back to the Earth now that the Earth has been repaired. And at the same time, they're not going alone. The aliens are going with them, and they're all going to have to work together. So the old days are done, that whatever that first version of human is, that's over. Just like with domesticated animals, my cat is not going to go back out into the wild and be a panther, even though he thinks he's a panther, and he has that in him, but that's over. He's a cat now, And so there are changes happening in this world of this story. And it just really reminds me of a lot of the abduction research, like by David Jacobs and John Mack, and the stories of hybridization and the idea that we might already have alien-human hybrids walking among us, and that a lot of what these aliens on the ships are doing is they are training the hybrids to integrate with human society. But what we know is that eventually they're going to overtake it, and the old kind of human is going to be gone. So who are we in all of this? And do we even have a choice? If any of this is real and true, at this point, let's just say that those aliens, based on the literature, have been interbreeding with humans and making genetic modifications, and that right now we already live in an integrated society, but it's just something that's hidden below the surface of what is accepted as real. I say if this is the case, we just gotta go with the flow. Whether or not we stay human or merge with the machine or merge with the aliens, in a way, it really doesn't matter, because no matter what, we're going to be a soul making decisions within that decision space, and we can work with whatever comes our way. But maybe it's good to think about, what would I like to happen? What do I want to happen? Do I want to just flow with the current of whoever's loudest and whatever's strongest? Or do I want to really bring all of my free will and my energy and my intent into the decision-making process and assert my own path forward in reality? Just something to think about. So another modern day super experiencer and contactee is Chris Bledsoe. He wrote the book UFO of God, and he's been getting a lot of attention in the last couple of years for his really incredible experiences and the work that he's been doing with intelligence agencies, with NASA, with people who are studying anomalous phenomena and the effects that it has on him and others. And one of the things he said in a recent interview with Jesse Michaels was, there are 3 types of people. People that can see, people I can teach to see, and people who will never see because they're too skeptical. And he says basically the phenomena will not let you in because it doesn't want to mess with your free will. So if you're like, absolutely not, this is fake, I don't want to hear it, I don't want to know about it, you won't, most likely. And he also said in the same interview that these beings can tend to pack a lot of information into your mind, and if you remembered it all at once, it would drive you crazy. So I'm going to read another little section from the book Dawn here, and this is our fictional novel that we are comparing with real-life experiencer accounts. It was nearly dark when they reached the settlement. People were gathered around fires, talking, eating. Nikanj and its mates were welcomed by the Onkali in a kind of gleeful silence, a confusion of sensory arms and tentacles, a relating of experience by direct neural stimulation. They could give each other whole experiences, then discuss the experience in non-verbal conversation. They had a whole language of sensory images and accepted signals that took the place of words. Lilith watched them enviously. They didn't lie often to humans because their sensory language had left them with no habit of lying, only of withholding information, refusing contact. Humans, on the other hand, lied easily and often. They could not trust one another. They could not trust one of their own who seemed too close to aliens. So, the reason I wanted to read this section is because most of the experiencer accounts refer to what they call telepathic communications. In this story, it's a kind of neural, chemical, actual communication. But if you were considering these two things both to be interpretations of a real phenomena that no one quite knows how to describe, and we just examine it that way for now, just for fun, it's interesting because they're both essentially describing the same type of thing in different terms. So when people talk about telepathic downloads or information packets being passed, sometimes it can be this full sensory experience. You can have, so a telepathic communication could be like a full body, emotional, physical, energetic, full 360, completely immersive communication. Whereas in our typical human communication, we're using the convention of words and gestures and tones and physical cueing. So we are getting information back and forth, but it's not the same as us just like injecting movies into each other's mind or like blasting you with like the smell of the roses that I smelled on my birthday instead of me just describing that smell to you with words. So it's very interesting in the story that the idea of this type of being not really being able to lie and not really lying very often, whereas humans lie quite frequently. It's like actually a part of how we operate on a regular basis. It's how we have evolved. It's really interesting to me because I feel that throughout the course of my life and throughout the course of my anomalous experiences and studies, one of the most important messages that I've received and taken to heart was to be consistent with my expression as much as possible, as much as is safe. So to be real, basically. And we all know you can't be all the way real in every situation, not in the current structure of reality. It's just not safe. It's not functional. But whenever possible, speak the truth and be aligned with the truth. And what I've done for myself is if I can't say what I really think, sometimes I just don't say anything at all. I try not to say a false thing instead of, just silence. If I have to hold back, that's one thing. And that's exactly what the Oankali aliens in this story are doing. If they don't want to express something, they just keep it to themselves. And this also relates to the work of the Telepathy Tapes podcast again, because the nonverbal autistic folks with apraxia who can't really control their bodies also talk about how important it is to them to be truthful and how people who lie cannot do the telepathic ability that they can do. They don't have it. They're not able to do it. We could learn it and we could get there, but we're going to need to become more aligned with truth in order to have more telepathic capabilities. I've experimented with this for years myself, and it's subtle, but I do believe that there has been an increase in my perceptive abilities in conjunction with my authenticity. Increasing my authenticity and letting go of some of the masking and falseness that I learned in order to survive in this reality. And that was a whole journey, but it's been a long time, and I will say that in my own experience, being more truthful is a way to increase psi ability. Okay, so that wraps up our first discussion, our first read of 2026, Dawn by Octavia Butler. If you haven't read this yet, I highly recommend it. The tone, it's eerie, it's interesting. There's this intimate quality Everyone describes her writing as lean prose, and I couldn't agree more. There's no fat, there's no fluff. It's to the point, it's artful, it is all working for the story. And it's a very fascinating read for anyone who studies abduction and contact experiences. If you have had an experience, just great validation in some of these moments with the main character, Lilith. Lilith is a Black woman. It's also very interesting to analyze the group dynamics of the other humans with her as their leader, their appointed leader. There's a lot about gender and sexuality and consent in this novel that was published in 1987. And it's all so relevant, again, to experiencer stories, because the idea of consent, it gets very blurry in a lot of these interactions that humans are having with non-humans. And it's really worth, if you want more of the real accounts and less of the fiction, I recommend digging into the work of Whitley Strieber. Get into Whitley Strieber's books and podcasts. Go to his website. I'll put all the links below for you. It's got so many parallels to this story, and I think it's really interesting to compare. If you would rather look at a spread of different kinds of experiencer accounts and you have a lot of time on your hands, I recommend the book Abduction by John Mack. And if you want to consider the hybridization possibility and this idea that perhaps there are already aliens integrating with humankind right now, check out the work of David Jacobs. Walking Among Us is one of the books that I've read and covered here on Shocks Talks. The next fictional book that I'm reading that actually relates entirely to my consciousness studies is a Dan Brown book, actually. It's called Secret of Secrets. And I never would have picked this for myself, but my sister started reading it and mentioned some of the things that he's covering in the story. And it is right up our alley. If you're into the Shocks Talks consciousness side, you're going to love this adventure book that is all about out-of-body travel, consciousness studies, secret underground bases, and research labs, and it even refers to actual scientists in the field. All of his research and his locations are all based in reality, and only the characters are fictional, so it's an even better one-to-one book for our analysis. So we're definitely going to be looking at that later in this season. And I also have some more nonfiction that I'm going to be reading soon. Alien Goddess is on my list by Dr. Joanna Kuyawa, and a couple more. So stay tuned, and I'll see you next time on Shocks Talks.